day in 1969. And it was interesting. It says here, July 20th, 1969, when man first set foot on the moon, 240,000 miles away from the Earth, this is what the world was like. Boeing Aircraft Company in Seattle was testing an airplane that will carry 450 people. A quart of milk cost 30 cents, and a loaf of bread 37 cents, and inflation was being fought to keep prices down. A box of Red Delicious apples brought growers $8 at the end of the season. Women wore miniskirts, hems high above the knees. Teenagers worshipped rock and roll bands, many of which featured musicians with long hair. Artificial milking of clouds for artificial rain was being tested, as was desalinization of seawater for irrigation. The stock market's Dow Jones average in a periodic slump was 846. Joe Frazier was the world's heavyweight boxing champion, and the major leagues consisted of 24 teams, one of which was operating in Seattle for the first time. Side note, next year it would be in Milwaukee. No cure for cancer had yet been discovered. Heart transplants were becoming common. Peace talks in connection with the Vietnam War were underway in Paris. Crime in the streets was the number one concern of most citizens. China continued as a threat to peace, with U.S.-Russia relations improving. Periodic race riots involving Negroes occurred in major cities, and student disturbances on campuses made news frequently. Juvenile delinquency was a major problem. Hippies, in parentheses it said men and women wearing long hair, were a common sight in bigger communities, their unkempt appearance being a protest against the establishment. And the Vice President of the United States, Spiro Agnew, said the next target for astronauts should be Mars. But quite a few people were saying that the country should spend the money instead to eradicate poverty. That is the way it was 50 years ago. How much has changed? And maybe how little. Hey, next time on Conversation Collage, we'll be talking with Andrew Schaefer. He is a humorist, has written a number of books, two-time Goodreads Choice Awards nominee, finalist in the humor category. Actually studied comedy writing at Second City in Chicago. And last year he wrote a book called Hope Never Dies, which turned the political brotherhood team of President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden into detectives. As a very well-received book, a surprising bestseller, as Schaefer will tell us. And he has now reteamed them, the Biden-Obama duo, in another book called Hope Rides Again. And we talk about the process of turning the former president and vice president into detectives, fictional detectives, I might add, came about, and what they're up to in book number 2. Pretty interesting. And also how Mr. Biden's presidential run is kind of throwing a monkey wrench into things. That next time on Conversation Collage. Let's continue speaking about cars here as we go on with Conversation Collage. The quest to build the driverless car. It is the subject of a book called Autonomy. The quest to build a driverless car and how it will reshape our world. We talked about that. And the book, which tells the story of the maverick engineers and computer geeks who are revolutionizing just how we move. You remember 10 years ago, the auto industry was going belly up, but meanwhile, Google was launching its autonomous car project. Ride-sharing was becoming the next big thing, particularly in San Francisco, and Tesla's new CEO, Elon Musk, was preparing to bring electric cars to the masses. The author of Autonomy knows of what he speaks. He is a former General Motors executive and current advisor to Google's self-driving car project, Lawrence Byrnes. And he took us through all those major developments, traced how they've converged over the past few years, and explains just how they've set the stage for the mobility revolution. We caught up a while back with Lawrence Byrnes, the author of Autonomy. Mr. Byrnes, hello. Pleasure to talk to you.
It's my pleasure as well. Thanks for having me on your show.
Where are you today?
I'm in Michigan today.
How soon are we really from having autonomous cars, say, in our garages or driveways, do you think?
Well, they're real today. They exist today. There are people in Chandler, Arizona, where Waymo is operating the first fleet of vehicles, hundreds of vehicles, moving people around in that area with autonomous rides. Now, they're not parked in their garages. So your question is, when can I have one for my own? We're probably in that 5 to 10 year window where this begins to become available in that kind of an application. What's exciting is the leaders in developing the self-driving systems are getting those systems close to creating real value for people, and then we'll just keep building on that foundation and make it better and better. And, there's 250 million cars in the United States, and I think we're going to see this tipping point where the future is going to be defined by what autonomy covers, and then it's just a matter of scaling it. And it's going to take a while to work through that 250 million cars to get it to everyone. But certainly this is happening a lot faster than anyone anticipated, and this time window from 2020 to 2030 is going to really bring this major change about.
Where did this all begin? Where was the start of this?
Well, the start of what I would call the modern autonomous vehicle actually was 9/11, unfortunately. When those tragedies happened, the terrorist attacks happened, it led to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the Department of Defense realized there had to be a way to keep our soldiers out of harm's way. These improvised explosive devices in the roads that were blowing up Humvees and maiming our soldiers. So the Department of Defense put some challenges together. They weren't happy that the defense contractors were getting at this, so they decided to create some races called the DARPA Grand Challenge and the DARPA Urban Challenge. The first one was across the deserts in 2004, and the last one, the Urban Challenge, was 2007. And that was the real seed. In 2007, 85 teams competed to allow a vehicle to go 60 miles with no one in it in Victorville, California. 14 made it to the finals, and GM, who I worked for at the time, and Carnegie Mellon won that race. And that sort of kicked off this whole series of events that we cover in the book, where Larry Page and Sergey Brin said, let's do this for real, put a real great team together, and then they've continued to push the development forward to this application that I talked about in Arizona for what's called Waymo, which is the Alphabet company or Google company.
You kind of opened the door saying that GM won the competition in 2007. Why isn't GM leading the way now? Why is it Google and Waymo that are doing it?
Well, yeah, that's an outstanding question. If you recall, in the fall of 2007, we had a thing called the subprime mortgage crisis.
Right.
In early 2008, oil had gone to 140 a barrel, and 2009, GM went bankrupt, and they were my employer. I was on what's called the GM Automotive Strategy Board, one of the top 13 people in the company, and so I was kind of asked to move on, as well as my boss, Rick Wagner. So what's amazing about this story, and it's captured well in Autonomy, is that the darkest age of the auto industry, when we were going through these financial crises, that's when Google stepped up and said, we're going to develop these self-driving cars. That's when Tesla popularized the Model S. And that's when Uber and Lyft emerged on the radar screen. So you have these three seeds, self-driving, electric, and transportation services emerge in the darkest hour of the auto industry. The other thing I would say is the auto leaders just didn't have this really bone-deep understanding of digital technology the way Silicon Valley did. They saw this as a 30 to 50-year play, whereas people like Larry and Sergey thought it was possible much sooner, and they committed to getting it done, and also committed to creating much better transportation experiences than owning and operating a car.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Byrnes, what are the pro sides to having two autonomous automobiles?
You saying the pro sides?
Yeah. What are the upsides to us?
Yeah, well, the upsides first is safety. There's 1.3 million people a year dying on the world's roadways, and we have a chance to eliminate 90% of the crashes caused by human error. So that's going to save 1 million people a year. If we can get to that full potential one day sooner, it's going to save 3,000 lives. So there's an urgency in getting this done. Next is getting off of oil. These vehicles want to be electric because they're service businesses, and you want to keep the cost per mile low. So the electricity savings versus gasoline will more than pay for putting the electric drive system on the car. My estimates are that oil demand for transportation in the U.S. could drop by 80%. So that's huge. That contributes to savings on climate change, on asthma, air pollution. Next is land used for parking. These vehicles are going to be moving almost constantly, so they're not going to be sitting around parked. There's 3 parking spaces per car in America. That contributes to our cities not being as dense as they could. So I think we're going to see some major benefits there. Also, the cost. We think the cost of moving around is going to drop dramatically. It's going to bring transportation equivalent to owning your own car to a lot of people who can't afford it, too young to drive, too old to drive, have disabilities. So these are the range of benefits. Safety, energy, lower cost, more accessibility, better land use, less congestion.
What are the downsides, though?
Well, the downsides are the fact that there's 4 million people in the United States that make a living being a driver. And we're going to have to work to transition these people to these new kinds of jobs. So that's a very, very real issue. A lot of businesses are going to be displaced. Corner gas stations, the parking industry, a lot of retailers, because there's a big synergy between autonomous vehicles and e-commerce, package delivery to your front door. So what Amazon does today on a pretty big scale is going to get just that much better when the packages can be delivered autonomously. So I think this impact on the economy is going to be very, very positive, because we're going to free up a lot of wasteful spending on things that the money shouldn't be spent on. But there's going to be jobs that get displaced, and that's definitely a real concern that has to be managed.
Mr. Byrnes, I like driving. I enjoy getting behind my car. I've been doing it for 40 years now. What's going to happen to me and my driving enjoyment?
Well, there are a lot of people who said they loved to ride horses back in the early 1900s, and you know what? They can still enjoy horses. They can go to horse races. They can do equestrian, play polo. No one's going to say that you can't drive a car. I suspect you don't like being stuck in traffic. I suspect there's a lot of times you wish you didn't have to pay attention to your driving. I suspect you don't like to stop to buy gas. And I suspect you hate looking for a place to park. So if you want to continue to do those things and have your own car to drive and get around that way, that's great. But no one's going to say you can't own a car. No one's going to say you can't drive a car. What we are saying, and what's covered well in autonomy, is there's going to be a whole lot of new solutions to get you around that I think a lot of people are going to like better than having to spend their time driving.
Mr. Byrnes, when people put down autonomy, what do you want them thinking? What do you want in their minds?
First and foremost, I want them to say, boy, this was a great read, because it is. There's some fascinating characters, there's some dramatic moments, some great stories. And so our hope is they say that, because that gets it to the mainstream reader, which is really important. We wrote the book because we want mainstream readers to understand what's going on and to really get the collective will behind these opportunities. Secondly, I want them to understand that this is happening. It's happening sooner than they think, and if they need to be prepared for this future. And then finally, I hope they're quite excited about a future where our transportation truly is sustainable, that future generations are going to have the freedom to get around and enjoy the great benefits that come from being able to go where you want to, when you want to, but in this case, without all these negative side effects that we have with cars.
Mr. Byrnes, I know your producers are going to give me the hook here any second now, but we should mention Christopher Shulgin, who's your co-author on this. I just got it, and I'm looking forward to reading it. Mr. Byrnes, I know I have to let you go. I thank you for a few minutes out. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you very much.
Lawrence Byrnes served as Corporate Vice President of Research, Development, and Planning at General Motors, where he oversaw GM's advanced technology and innovation programs as well as corporate strategy, was also a professor of engineering practice at the University of Michigan, and led the program for sustainable mobility at Columbia University. And for almost 10 years now, he has served as an advisor to the Google self-driving car project, which you know as Waymo. And we caught up with him from his home in Michigan. And that will do it for this edition of Conversation Collage. I thank you for tuning in, no, not tuning in, downloading or uploading or however you do this. And we hope you'll continue to do it next time, when we'll have Andrew Schaefer, the author of Hope Rides Again, and other things as well. Get in touch with us, message us, friend us on Facebook, find us on Instagram. We are available, everywhere. Ken Johannesson here. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time, and be good to yourself, huh?